Problem 24, we're just going to graph this function over one period or cycle, and just pointing out here that the horizontal axis is the theta axis. Theta is the independent variable, and then the y axis is the vertical axis, and the y is our dependent variable. So y depends on theta. So each value of theta we pick, we generate a new value for y, and that's just like it is for every function. And the first thing we do when we are graphing trig functions, we're going to figure out what the period is. And the period is always 2 pi divided by b. Now, in this case, it's a little bit trickier to figure out what that b is, but b is always the number that's the coefficient of the theta. So if you want to think about this as -3 times the sine of 2/3 times theta, that's one way to write it. So maybe it looks a little bit easier to see that the b value is 2/3, but it's always the coefficient of the theta. So in other words, when we want to find the period, we take 2 pi and divide it by whatever number is right there. And the number right there is 2/3. Now that's a little bit ugly as well, 2 pi over 2/3. So I want to write that in a way that makes it a little bit more visually pleasing. 2 pi divided by 2/3. And we know when we divide by fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal. So 2 pi divided by 2/3 is the same as 2 pi times 3/2. And 2 pi times 3/2, the 2's cancel and we get 3 pi. So we should be able to figure out that 3 pi is the period of this function. So if I go over every 3 units, I'm going to make a little mark. Oh, I can do it by 4 units now. I made this longer than the other one. Okay, well, I already committed to 3 units here, so we're going to have to go with that. So if this is my mark for 3 pi, then I cut that in half. That's my next step, cut that in half. And then my next step is to cut 3 pi over 2 in half. And thinking about 3 pi over 2 cutting that in half, we're going to just take half of that, or 1/2 times 3 pi over 2, which is 3 pi over 4. You could also think about it as multiplying the denominator by 2. And then we take this one here. It takes 1, 2, 3 pi over 4, 4, 5, 6 pi over 4, 7, 8, 9 pi over 4 would be that value right there. So that's 9 pi over 4. And then, so that takes care of dividing our period into 4 equal parts. And then we have to plot and find and plot the amplitude. And the amplitude again is, let's put that over here, amplitude. That's always going to be the absolute value of a. And a in this case is -3, and the absolute value of -3 is 3. So I'll put 3 up here, and then -3 down there. And then we plot the 5 key points that correspond to the parent function. And we already have the first one. Remember that a is negative, and then if we have a sign. So a is negative and sign, it goes down first and then up. So we're going to go down here first, then back up, and then back down. So we go down here like this, connect the dots with a nice smooth curve. And so that is it. Just when you do your graph on your test, make sure that you label the 4 key points here. If one of the key points is 0, then you don't have to label it, but make sure that your x-axis is labeled, make sure that your y-axis is labeled, and that you have any work that shows what the period is and as well as the amplitude.